All right, today we're going to dig into something that affects a lot of local communities, a school bond. Specifically, we're looking at Measure D24 in the Templeton Unified School District. Now, what's interesting here is that we're going to piece together the story of what happens after a measure gets passed, using nothing but the public record. We're talking emails, official policies, all that good stuff. So let's jump right in.
So think about it. You're in the voting booth, right? And you see a school bond measure. It lists a bunch of projects, a big dollar amount, and you vote. But have you ever wondered what you're really approving? What power does that yes vote actually give the school district? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today using Measure D24 as our case study.
And make no mistake, the stakes here are, well, they're pretty high. We're talking about $52.3 million. Yeah, that's a huge investment for any community, and it comes with the promise of some really big improvements for the kids and the schools.
Okay, so to really get a handle on what's going on now, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to look at what was officially promised to voters right before they cast their ballots. What was the public story?
So here's a breakdown of what was in the official voter guide. You know, the argument in favor of Measure D24. And the focus seems super clear, right? It's all about updating STEAM classrooms. That's your science, tech, engineering, arts, and math. Plus, they promised the money would stay local and that there'd be total transparency with citizen oversight. These were the big selling points. The core promises made to everybody.
But here's where things get interesting. The public record shows that while all this was being presented to the voters, a very different conversation was happening behind the scenes. And this was going on 5 whole months before anyone even voted.
And here we go. This is an internal email from back in June 2024, 5 months before the election. And in it, a district official is telling the bond advisor they have some pretty serious concerns. They're worried that the language being written for the ballot is just too narrow.
And this part is really key. The email says, and I'm quoting here, "I just can't shake the feeling that a few essential elements of what we'd most likely be spending the bond funds on gets no mention. I worry that it is too narrow and omits perhaps the biggest element of spending we'll undertake." Whoa. So what they're saying is, the stuff we're telling the public about, it leaves out what might be the single biggest expense. So right from the get-go, they knew there was a potential disconnect.
So you'd think, okay, they've identified a problem. Did they fix it? Did they change the ballot language to be more upfront about the spending? Well, no. Instead, the bond advisor's response basically pointed to a way around it, a kind of loophole in the fine print. And here's the strategy, laid out plain as day. The advice was, the resolution gives you wide berth to make changes in the resolution and exhibits. What does that mean? It means don't worry about the specific promises on the ballot that everyone sees. The other official documents, the ones most people never read, give you all the flexibility you need to change things later. That's a pretty big deal.
Okay, let's fast forward. The election is over, the bond passes, and now, with that wide berth they talked about, the district's priorities start to, well, they start to shift. They pivot towards some really big projects that, funny enough, weren't front and center in the voter guide.
All of a sudden, the big talk is about a full-on campus swap and a brand new multi-million-dollar gym. I mean, these are massive projects, way beyond just updating some science and art classrooms, which was the original pitch.
So at the school board meetings, the argument for the new gym was that it was a huge community need. You hear things like, this community is involved in athletics. The gyms are used until 10:30 at night. We don't even have enough time in the gyms we have right now. It's presented as this massive grassroots demand.
But then, when someone filed a public records request to actually see all this supposed community support, the documents told a different story. It wasn't a flood of spontaneous emails from parents. Instead, what turned up were messages like this, which show that there was actually an organized effort to get people to show up and speak in favor of the gym.
And this quote from a board member really drives that point home. They said, "I've maybe received one email in support of the swap, but I've seen countless in opposition. And sometimes I think we need to listen for our community." That really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a board member is seeing overwhelming opposition, whose version of community support is driving the decisions?
All right, so this brings us to another really important piece of the puzzle. We're going to look at the district's own official rulebook. And this isn't about what people think or feel. This is about the actual written down policies for how bond money can be spent.
We're zooming in on something called Board Policy 7214. What it does is it lays out what the district is allowed to do based on how much of the vote a bond gets. And there's a big difference between a bond that gets 55% approval and one that needs a supermajority, like 2/3 of the vote.
Let's break this down. On the left, you've got the 55% bond, which is what Measure D was. It gives authority for things like construction, repairs, and replacement. Pretty standard stuff. But now, look at the right side. To get a 66.67% bond, you need a lot more votes, and it gives the district way more power. Specifically, it gives them the authority to demolish or raze a school building to replace it. That's a huge difference.
So this all boils down to one really important question. Does this huge campus swap they're planning, which involves totally reconfiguring and moving things around, actually fall under the powers of the 55% bond that voters approved, or does it look a lot more like something that would require that higher level 2/3 vote that they didn't get?
Okay, so let's take a step back for a second. When you put all these pieces from the public record together, the emails, the board policies, the meeting minutes, a pretty clear pattern starts to show up.
Here's the pattern. 1. Internally, there were worries that the ballot language was way too narrow for what they really wanted to do. 2. They went ahead and put that narrow language in front of voters anyway. 3. As soon as the bond passed, the focus pivoted to these huge new projects like the campus swap. And 4, these new plans seemed to line up with powers from a different kind of bond, one that needed more votes than they got.
And this whole pattern, it just brings up some really big questions. Was the whole process actually transparent? Are the plans they have now really what voters signed up for? And are these new spending priorities based on what the entire community wants, or just a vocal few?
Look, let's be super clear about this. This isn't really about whether a new gym is a good idea or a bad one. It's about something bigger. It's about the process itself. It's about that trust between the public and its elected officials. The idea that what you vote for is what actually happens.
So at the end of the day, all we can do is lay out the public record, the emails, the policies, the timeline of events. We're not here to give a final verdict, but it all leaves us with one really powerful question to think about. Based on everything we've just walked through, does this process feel transparent to you? Does it seem consistent with what the vote has approved? That's really for you to decide.